The Finley Holiday slide cassette program that you are about to see and hear is the first of its kind ever made available to the public. And it is a new high in audio-visual entertainment for people of all ages. It's very simple to use. Please follow these instructions. First, place your 40 slides in the projector and move to slide 1. Then, each time that you hear the tone, advance the slide. It's as simple as that. So now, sit back and let's enjoy the show.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
With those prophetic words, President Kennedy launched America on its greatest crusade. A crusade that swept up the entire nation in a common desire to bring about that goal. To conquer space by landing courageous men upon the surface of the distant moon. Today, where that crusade began so many years ago, a great spaceport of the future stands, dedicated as a perpetual monument to that dream and man's first historic step into space. The purpose of this program is to take you on a tour, seen by millions of Americans each year, of this enormous facility, and to give you a glimpse of a project so complex and far-reaching as to tax your capacity to absorb what you see. This is the Visitor Center, a large group of structures housing displays and demonstrations of NASA's space programs. As we view the Visitor Center across one of the countless waterways that interlace this huge facility, we realize that the magnitude of the spaceport dwarfs any other man-created project on Earth. As far as the eye can see, gigantic structures tower toward the sky. But more about this later on. Let's begin our tour, one that will live with you as one of the most exciting of your life. Before we enter the Visitor Center, let us visit the rocket display area nearby. Here we will find an interesting grouping of famous rockets and other missile and rocket equipment, including the Atlas Agena rocket and a Delta rocket. However much excitement the rockets generate, the real thrill will come, especially for children, when a spaceman, fully dressed in his spacesuit, appears on the scene. Why, you may even have your picture taken with him. And then there's the full-scale model of the Moonlander, the space vehicle that landed so many of our dedicated astronauts on the dangerous lunar surface. The two astronauts were housed in the upper ascent section. The descent stage, or lower section, which contains tools and experimental equipment, was left on the lunar surface and actually served as a platform for the upper stage. It is made of aluminum alloy. As we enter the Visitor Center proper, we see the area devoted to Earth resources and benefits. Some people simply do not realize the enormous benefits that have been reaped by everyone from space spin-offs. They are too numerous and far-reaching to even begin to recount here, but to mention just a few. Global monitoring from space of air and water pollution. Analysis of world crops and growing conditions that have been fantastically successful. The exploration and discovery of desperately needed energy sources such as oil, coal, and geothermal pockets of hot steams that are proceeding at an expanding rate. Our rapidly improving weather forecasts are due almost entirely to space research. We have new electronics, new types of cloth, paints, appliances, chemicals. We live in safer homes, wear more durable and attractive clothes, and, most important, we have vast new medical benefits that would not have been possible without our space program and research. These are only a few, but they are very small indeed compared to the benefits that lie in the future. The most informative and one of the most interesting displays that you will visit in the center will be the free lecture program and movies that are provided daily. These space science lecture programs inform the public of NASA's past, present, and future projects. Here, our lecturer holds a shuttle model in his hands as he explains its great potential benefits for all mankind. One of the center's newest and most interesting attractions is the Hall of History. As we enter, we are startled by the vast array of spacecraft, satellites, and informative displays which explain and illustrate many of NASA's programs. They are designed to increase our knowledge of the universe in which we live and to improve the quality of life on Earth. In the foreground, we see the Apollo 13 command capsule that made a perilous moon orbital flight after the near disaster of a powerful onboard explosion which ripped the service module apart. Note the scorched streaks where the heat shield was eroded away. In the background, suspended from the ceiling, you will notice a full-scale model of a Russian Soyuz spacecraft that, together with an American Apollo spacecraft, achieved an international space cooperation milestone on July 17, 1975. For the first time, two different vehicles from two nations joined together to declare the peaceful use of space for all nations and for all time. It is hoped that this effort paved the way for eventual future space missions, eliminating duplication and cutting the costs of space exploration. In this portion of the giant hall, we will find many different sizes and types of space communication satellites, spanning nearly 2 decades of space flight. Here also, our visitors can inspect the elaborate space suits worn by our Apollo astronauts. Years of research went into their development, and they are the most involved and efficient garments of their kind ever designed. Of all manned space projects, the one that has brought about many of his most important discoveries was Skylab. After a doubtful launch, during which the craft survived severe damage, 3 teams of astronauts spent months on board performing countless experiments. This multiple docking adapter is the area from which the astronauts controlled a variety of scientific instruments, including 8 telescopes, all of which collected vast amounts of information about our sun, the Earth, and the outer reaches of the solar system. For example, more was learned about the sun during this short time than had been gathered previously in all past history. The displays designed by NASA and TWA are truly unique. Their primary purpose is to enlighten you, in an entertaining and educational manner, on the magnificent programs that NASA has developed in the past and to project the awe-inspiring programs of the future that hold untold benefits for all. Here we see the display of Intelsat global communication systems. We will return to the visitor center at the conclusion of our tour, but now it is time to embark upon our great adventure, the breathtaking tour of the mightiest man-made creation on this planet, the enormous rocket facilities of the Kennedy Space Center. First, we will board an air-conditioned tour bus escorted by expert tour commentators. We will spend 2 hours and travel many miles, all within the confines of this immense spaceport. In a sense, the Kennedy Space Center, as we know it today, was born when the United States embarked upon Project Apollo, the manned lunar expedition. This was in 1961. The huge NASA center of today bears little resemblance to the modest and relatively primitive facilities located nearby prior to this time. The center is controlled from this large headquarters building, the administrative heart for spaceport operations. The Cape is interlaced with bayous and waterways. Much of this area was once marshland. In prehistoric times, giant dinosaurs roamed here. Their bones have been dredged from the mud and sand during construction. The Kennedy Space Center is also a national wildlife refuge. There are nearly 200 species of birds living on the 140,000 acres controlled by the center. Much other wildlife thrives on the center, including raccoons, armadillos, deer, hogs, and over 4,000 alligators. The flight of Apollo 11 has been recorded as perhaps the moment of mankind's most dramatic achievement. None of us who lived through those thrilling moments will ever forget the suspense of that moment when Neil Armstrong's voice proclaimed, "The Eagle has landed." During your Kennedy tour, you will be able to recapture that moment when you visit a full-scale reconstructed lunar landing site. In the flight crew training building, astronauts rehearsed flight to the moon techniques. In this impressive unit, they learned to navigate using films of the stars and planets and actual lunar terrain. A complete lunar flight, including sights and sounds, could be simulated with this equipment. Only the experience of weightlessness could not be duplicated. Many of the sights and scenes that we will see on our tour will bring back a flood of nostalgic memories. Here is the original Mercury Mission Control, where the very first of our manned space flights and early Gemini space missions were controlled. Project Mercury proved that we could orbit manned spacecraft, that man was capable of living and working in space, and that we could safely recover man and spacecraft. Mercury laid that first sound foundation for the longer and more complex missions of Gemini and Apollo. As part of our tour, we will visit the fascinating Air Force Museum, which is composed of a vast array of military rocketry and historic space vehicles. Many other important operations lie within its perimeter, including a building where engineers checked out and prepared spacecraft such as Mariners, Rangers, and Surveyors for their outstanding missions to the moon and planets. This is Historic Launch Complex 26. From this launch complex, 5-6, Alan Shepard began his flight and became the first American to penetrate outer space in a Mercury Redstone rocket at 9:34 a.m. on May 5, 1961. From this modest beginning, man reached the moon, and later, Shepard himself walked on the lunar surface as commander of Apollo 14. We have now reached the Mercury Monument, which is dedicated to the original 7 astronauts: Virgil Grissom, Alan Shepard, John Glenn, Scott Carpenter, Leroy Cooper, Walter Schirra Jr., and Donald Slayton. The monument is fashioned from stainless steel, similar to that used in the Atlas launch vehicle. The number 7 represents the number of astronauts, and around it is the astronomical symbol of the planet Mercury. John Glenn, first American astronaut to orbit the Earth, was launched from this historic site. We have seen many exciting things during our tour so far, but as the far western motto goes, you haven't seen anything yet. Out of the tour bus window, we will get our first glimpse of a mighty Saturn V rocket. In all probability, man will never again see another rocket of this immense size and power, as high as a 36-story building, weighing 6 million pounds, 800 tons heavier than most Navy destroyers, developing a thundering 7.5 million pounds of thrust at liftoff, lighting the sky and countryside at night for 20 miles as bright as day, shaking the ground with the force of an earthquake, jarring one's senses with its unbelievable fury. This was the great Saturn V. It does not seem possible that such an enormous rocket could have been transported by any means. But NASA decided that a craft of this size could not be assembled in the open. So they designed and built the largest transport mechanism ever conceived, a gigantic tracked vehicle called simply the transporter or crawler because of its slow speed of 1 mile per hour. 2 were built, each weighing 6 million pounds. This incredible machine lifted from underneath the enormous mobile launcher, which weighed another 12 million pounds. This, in turn, cradled the giant Saturn V, as seen here. These transporters have now been converted to transport the spacecraft of the future, the shuttle. Behind the Saturn V is the colossal vehicle assembly building where the Saturn V was prepared for launch and where now the space shuttles and their components will be prepared and mated for space flight. The building is among the largest man-made structures on Earth. In fact, it was described as one of the most awesome construction jobs ever attempted by earthbound men. Some of the steel beams used were the largest ever rolled in this country. Its interior is so huge that a special ventilation system had to be designed to keep clouds from forming inside. 1 million rivets were used in its assembly. The gigantic doors are almost beyond belief. Measuring 456 feet high, they are taller than the Statue of Liberty. The interior height falls short by only 28 feet of allowing the Washington Monument, one of the tallest masonry structures in the world, to stand inside. Man's next and perhaps greatest step into space is the wonderful Space Shuttle. This vehicle has been described by some as the craft that man will use to jump 1,000 years into the future. Scholars may well look back someday upon the first flight of the shuttle as the beginning of true space travel. In this series of slides, we see the first space shuttle orbiter being test flown at Edwards Air Force Base in California, mated to a Boeing 747 especially adapted for carrying the shuttle piggyback aloft for testing and transportation. This test flight series was called Approach and Landing Test. The first orbiter was named the Enterprise after the spaceship of the popular television series Star Trek. The 747 carried the Enterprise to more than 20,000 feet, then released it, allowing the two astronaut pilots to conduct a variety of approach and landing tests. Later, the shields covering the shuttle's enormous engines were removed for additional landing tests. Now we reach one of the most popular tour stops, the Launch Control Center. This is Firing Room 3. It is the control room used for the launch of the historic Apollo 11 flight to the moon. Here, visitors experience a simulated countdown at launch similar to that of Apollo 11. This famous photograph is known as ICBM Road. Most gantries are gone now, but not so long ago an awe-inspiring sight stood here. Row upon row of gantries, launch complex after launch complex seemingly stretched to infinity. Here a vital chapter in the history of man has been written. Future generations may stand speechless upon this spot, knowing that man took his first serious step into the outer universe from this very place. Our tour has now returned us to the visitor center, so we may browse and have refreshments. The Carousel Cafeteria is unique in itself. Its revolving counter allows the customer to remain stationary while the entire menu passes within easy access. The souvenir store is a must for all visitors. A great variety of space souvenirs, clothing, models, and other mementos of your visit are readily available. Many of the visitors to the Kennedy Space Center tours elect to take a launch tour. This is the regularly scheduled tour with the possibility of viewing an actual launch, which is scheduled during the operating hours of the tours. Sights such as this seen in the East Florida sky are viewed by millions each year. Life began on Earth over 2 billion years ago. Man has existed here for over 1 million years. Yet it has been only about 2 decades since life emerged out of our atmosphere into outer space. 1 million years hence, historians may well regard the middle of this century as the turning point of our own species. America's space program has vastly increased human knowledge of the environment in which our spaceship Earth travels. The future offers projects and benefits to mankind so enormous as to be almost incomprehensible. And today, a feeling of common interest, of vast new horizons toward which man has set his goals, are being developed among nations. So as we catch our last glimpse of the rapidly fading rocket, we of Earth know for certain now that man, at long last, has taken that most important first step toward the distant stars.